I kuna lahi he whakotu ako koe ni pe mo Digicel International. Ave ai topa panga e wanoa, prepaid bundle pe koe talafiselini ki ho family pe e huhohi ngoa ki lulu ki kuna ai Samsung Galaxy Flip Z pe S21 pe koe pare pa anga e wangi au he wika kotoa pe. Ki hao whainga maari ke i kuna pe ke ngawe aki e Digicel International app pe koe digicelinternational.com pe ahia e whanakoloa. Fitu taki ma au pe mho kainga aki ho ave ai topa prepaid bundle pe talafiselini he aho ni.
Heart attack. When you said you're doing well, it's all I had. And that's just been like hell. Guess I'm only thinking that give away won't last. But I never thought you'd forget me so fast.
I'm always for you.
Marhaba, assalamu alaikum, malo elelei, malo lau mariho eiki mo lelei ai tonga solo mo i vulanko tonga tare tele leiki mo tolu ke World Expo wa pe ma wanoa watahanga tonu pe mei heni mei tiupai ia pure anga whakatasaha ko Alepea United Arab Emirates mawhia fia ke vahe mo tolu i he weekendi ai ngai polokalama maarie me ngai whare ke kehe e te au himunga fulu maua o kuna kau mai ki Expo ko inika o maa fo ke ngahi talanoa mo hatau kainga tonga o muna nofo i he hahake loto whakatawange pe o wa ulele atu ke tiki mo tolu mo mea mai waha ope me ho mo le tio mo televisione Pasifika. Malo lau maria ho eiki mo le lea tonga solo mai vulang kotoa ta tele ki mo tolu ki tau polokalama kuia e fia fini polokalama talanoa pia me homo le tio mo televisione Pasifika o fia mo hakai langi tau e polokalamani ke mao whenga maarie ke whakahoko hawhi po talanoa aki pe mo Matt Carroll e kuia foki e pule lahi o komiti olimpiki whawhanua kuia o Australia pe mau ihene ai muia i he whare whawhanua kuia o Australia i he polokalama kehe koe ni whakaaki pe mo diplomacy pe koe tawhaki o diplomacy Metika i he Pasifiki fo mai i he sipoti. Pacifica TV and Radio are so honoured here this evening to be joined here on our program TALANOA here on Pacifica TV and Radio together with Matt Carroll, who is the Chief Executive of the Australian Olympic Committee. Matt, thank you so much. Malo lele and welcome to our Tongan program here on Pacifica TV and Radio.
Absolute pleasure.
It's an honour for you to give up your time to have a chat with us this evening. Tell us a little bit about the program tonight in terms of the importance of diplomacy with the Pacific, particularly through sports and how it plays out on the world stage.
Well, diplomacy in sport plays out right across the globe because I mean, sport's one of the things that brings people together. So governments obviously understand that that's important for their diplomatic strategies and things of that nature. So they understand sport, and obviously from the Australian Olympics point of view, we're very much committed to sport right across Oceania. Not just in our country. So how it all sort of DFAT, or Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australia, approached the Australian Olympic Committee at the end of 2020. The year's getting a bit merged here these days.
Yes.
To design a program to help get the support, I shouldn't say help, to support the Pacific athletes, Olympians and Paralympians, get to the Games in Tokyo, do their final preparations, final training, and we put that together. Worked with them, did a plan to make a plan, as you have to do with these things, and it was quite successful. Even during the middle of the pandemic, it was very tough, particularly on the islands and the transportation and things of that nature, and being able to prepare and got athletes, some into Australia, some in their home countries, but most importantly, got them to the Games. And as we know, the Fiji Sevens teams did very well, but as important, a lot of athletes broke their national records at the Games, which was equally as important in many ways. So then the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade want to see how they continue that for that 10-year lead into 2032, because the Olympic Games, okay, they're going to be in Brisbane, Queensland, but they're the Oceania Games as well, and we're very committed to making that work.
How would you like to see the development of athletes and of sports in the Pacific Islands, given Australia does play a huge role, both diplomatically and of course the size of Australia and its Olympics team each year, and this is our backyard, I suppose, in the Pacific region. How would you like to see sports develop more in terms of the various Pacific Island nations?
Well, same as what from our point of view, from what we're doing in Australia, we call it 10 plus 10. 10 years into the Games and 10 years after the Games. The Games are a great catalyst, they're a great anchor point in that period. But it's important for, it's not just a one-off. That we use the Games because actually, just stopping for a second, some of the athletes we're talking about, the 8-year-olds of today, they're going to be the Olympians in 2032. And so there's a very strong pathway. There's an opportunity there for the government, the Australian government to support, and the Australian Olympic Committee to coordinate, because at the end of the day, it's still up to each nation to what they want to do and how they want to do it, because it's their athletes. And so I think that the opportunity is this generational change. Not just the Games in 32. We can use this 10-year runway in and then 10 years afterwards to make a real difference, and bring on the Olympians. I mean, the islands have had Olympians for years. Maybe there's an opportunity to get a few more medals, apart from the rugby sevens. But also I'm a great believer in the new sports that refresh the Games. It could often, I think our Pacific neighbours could actually quite excel in.
I know that access to facilities in the islands can be somewhat limited in many cases due to infrastructure and so forth. And I'm aware that there has been some programs such as Fiji and Papua New Guinea where had a game on the Gold Coast, which unfortunately I think was cancelled due to the flooding and the rain. Yeah. What other programs are available or that are happening here on Australian soil in terms of the Pacific development?
Well, it's my personal attitude, but also that of the ASC. That's not just about a program. What we're suggesting to the government is that we work over the next 9 or so months using professionals from the Sports Commission and the AIS in Australia to work with each island. What's their how do they want to move their sports ahead, and what focus do they want to make on it. And it's an investment in each country's sporting program, because they know their talent, they know their resources, but also not just about athletes, coaching, and also training equipment. Whatever, we got a lot of feedback from the program we ran last year about what the countries are looking for. And so I think there needs to be based around that, rather than designing a program in Australia and saying, here, this is the program to run. No, what do you need? And because each of the countries is a little bit different in their sports. There's people keep saying, oh, they like their rugby. Yes, I know that, but weightlifting is quite big in a few countries, and there's all sorts of other sports. And there's a couple of new, there's rowing. Not normally a big sport in the Pacific in terms of traditional form, but there's offshore rowing they're talking about. Now that could be a sport which, personally, I think that could be quite attractive for athletes in the islands. But it's not only just about that, it's also about then how we grow participation and all those other benefits of sport, which is going to be important as well.
You mentioned some of the feedback from the Pacific Island countries. What was some of that feedback that came in? Obviously it varies from country to country, but could you give us some examples of the kind of feedback we're talking about?
Look, it depending what they were doing. It would take the Solomons, they wanted assistance to help with the Pacific Games. Coming up, some expertise and training and things of that nature. Others, it was about equipment. Others, it was about coaching. I mean, all the things. It was very universal in that respect, but which would be the same in Australia, by the by. I mean, our sports are on exactly the same page, and it's just that you sort of look ahead, and we won't. I don't think we'll be hosting the games in our part of the world. We'd be lucky if it's the other side of the next coming century. So this is just once in a generation opportunity to really do something special. And the Australian Olympic Committee is certainly committed to making it work for Oceania across all the countries.
In the lead up to the Brisbane Olympic Games in 2032, which is very exciting for a few of us, particularly some of us are based in Brisbane.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to that. Do you envisage seeing more games or activities in Australia, bringing Pacific athletes out of the islands onto Australian soil for competition?
One of the, and it's the same as for Australian athletes, is getting competition. And a lot of the Olympic sports, as we know, you have to travel. You have to go to Europe or go to North America and other parts. And so one of the things we're recommending to be part of the program is that support of athletes being able to seek out competition overseas. There will be, there's about 30 international events coming to Australia already between now and 2032. Not all of them will be qualifiers. For obvious reasons. So that it's very important for the athletes to be able to get to the qualifications and not only to qualifications, but to get to events where they can get that experience and opportunity. And for the para-athletes, it's very important they get to the competitions where they can do the qualification in their particular, I'm trying to think of the right word, I've forgotten it off the top of my head, which puts them into the right category. The right categorisation, that's very important. So there's different needs, and it's not that hard to do as long as you get the right amount of funding and support. Yeah.
Probably sort of a bit of a segue off that in terms of funding and so forth is what are some of the challenges or barriers that currently exist in terms of achieving some of these goals? Maybe it's logistics or flights to the Pacific and so forth.
I think yes, and yes. You nailed them all. But I think it's also, I think coaching is very important. As I said, countries have talent. It's being able to bring that talent on. So I think having, and not necessarily importing coaches, but coaches, so you can spread the knowledge, and being able to identify talent. Now, focusing on all the sports is probably not going to be feasible. So each asking, what sports do you really want to focus on? What's going to what your young up and comers. I said the 8-year-olds today. The sport of skateboarding could be a sport for the Pacific, and in the case of skateboarding, we're talking about the 4-year-olds of today for 2032. So there's time, but the time starts now. It's a bit like starting a race. The time starts now. Yeah.
That's it. I was actually going to ask you the question about in terms of, aside from what the Pacific Islands have requested, but what sports do you observe in your experience that would be good for the Pacific, or areas that they could consider as potential sports based on the physique or you mentioned the rowing a little bit earlier. Yeah. Obviously, Pacific has a history of canoeing and so
exactly. Forth. Yeah. Look, it's up to each country to decide. It's not up to me to to suggest what they should do. But I mean, they're already strong in a number of sports, and as I said, women's weightlifting in particular, in a number of the countries, is quite strong. And so again, with access to good training, good facilities, and also overseas competition, I think those sort of sports can come in. And it is for men and women. It's got to be that good gender balance is what the IOC are about now. But some of the new sports, sports climbing, I think the good thing about some of the new sports is they're cost effective. You're not building big indoor basketball courts or indoor courts. Like you're cost effective, and I think knowing the physicality and the strength and of the island athletes, Pacific Island athletes, I think there's not an opportunity those sort of ones. But for kids, if it's skateboarding, why not?
Absolutely.
It would be perfect. I mean, freestyle BMX, that natural athleticism that you come from the Pacific athletes. I mean, they've been fantastic on the rugby field over the decades, but I think they could equally do as well in other sports as well.
That's fabulous. We're here at Expo 2020. For yourself in your role, what has been some of the highlights for you or opportunities that you've been afforded by this connection of having Australia, which has a very large pavilion here at Expo, here in the United Arab Emirates? We're in the Middle East, the first exposition in the Middle East. What are some of the opportunities or networking you've been able to achieve? Well,
I'll be really honest with you and say I only flew in on Sunday.
All right.
Because I've been at the Beijing Games.
Right.
So I haven't been here long. But look, it's amazing. I mean, it's you'd need to spend a month or more here to get around and see everything that's happening. And I'm told the Australian pavilion has done very well in their visitation, which is excellent. But look, I think anything that brings the world together and brings it together in a good way, as distinct from some of the issues we have, and sadly, of course, with Russia and Ukraine at the moment, is not a good way at all. So I think anything that brings the world together, no matter what it is a good thing.
It's really interesting. You've touched there on Russia and Ukraine, and I know that sports is a great way to bring countries together. Politics aside, that does bring everyone together. How did you feel that the Beijing Olympics went? There was a little bit of controversy here and there, but overall, from an Australian perspective, how did we go?
Oh, look, well, from our point of view, in terms of success in results, the best ever. And not just in medal counts, but also personal bests and top 10 finishes. So that went very well. The athletes themselves, not from me, rated as some of the best venues and best villages they've ever been at. And these came from athletes who've been to 3 or 4 games. So from our point of view, yes, there was a closed loop, but the pandemic creates those circumstances. And no, look, we thought it went very well. We were quite obviously very proud of our team. And that's just not just Australia, but I've spoken to some of my counterparts from the United States and Canada, and they felt the same way as well. This is good games. Yes, there are other issues on the which come to play, and that's why the current situation is quite an issue for the Olympic movement. We try to stay out of the politics, but sometimes you can't.
Finally, as we come to a conclusion, is there any final words you'd like to say to any of our Pacific people, particularly the people of Tonga and all our Pacific nations who might be watching in terms of sport from the Australian Olympic Committee? Well,
I think, as I said at the beginning, the Brisbane 32 Games are a great opportunity, not just for Australia, for Oceania. And we want to we'll work with the government, we want to work with your good selves through ONOC as well, how we can make sure this generational opportunity, because as I said, I don't think they're going to be back for a while, is fully done. And it's not just the 10 years into the games, it's the 10 years afterwards. So you embed those opportunities. So, and whatever we can do to assist, we're here to help.
It's fantastic. Matt Carroll, thank you so much for your time. It's great to have you here on the program. Ko Matt Carroll whokia koe pule lahi pe koe tue CEO whokia o e komiti olimpiki whawhanua koe Australia. Tau I heni ai mo ia he ahoni I he Expo wawhi mawanoa I heni tiu pai he pureanga whakatataha ko Alepea. Wa te whakamalo me he polokalamani kia tia ne tuku taimi ke whakahoko whe po talanoa aki mo tau tolu he ahoni. Malo pito mo mea mai, ka mo mea tua wha.
You said you're doing well, Sylvie's all I had. And that's just been like hell, guess I'm only thinking that you ain't moved fast. But I never thought you'd forget me so fast.
I'm always on 4G.
I'm saying
lahi he whakatu ako koe ni pe moe Digicel International. Ave ai topa pangai wanoa, prepaid bundle pe koe talafiselini ki ho family pe e huhohi ngoa ki lulu ki kuna ai Samsung Galaxy Flip Z pe S21 pe koe pare pa angai uang iau he wika kotoa pe. Ki hao whainga maari ke ikuna pe ke ngawe aki e Digicel International app pe koe digicelinternational.com pe ahia e whanakoloa. Fitu taki mau pem ho kāinga aki ho ave ai topa prepaid bundle pe talafiselini e ahoni.